Hey, it's Nathan. Before we start, I want you to hold one idea in your head because the whole story turns on it. There is a job in the American military where the entire point is to go get people. Not to hunt anybody, not to take a hill, to go into the worst place on the map, find one broken human being, and carry him out alive. The men who do it wear a maroon beret and a motto that has 3 words in it, that others may live. I bring it up because most revenge stories are about a man who is good at hurting people finally getting permission to hurt people. This one isn't. This one is about a man who spent 19 years being extremely good at retrieval, and about 4 men who found out what it feels like to be retrieved. Along the way, you're going to learn something genuinely useful about how a small county can be owned legally on paper by one family, and about the specific trick they use to do it, because it's real and it's happening in places you could drive to this weekend. There's a phone call in this story that made me put my coffee down. There's a night on a river that I could not stop thinking about. And there's a moment at an airport gate that I would pay money to have watched. Stay with me to the end. The last thing this father does is not the loudest thing he does, and it is by far the worst. Lawson Teal had a ritual with his son, and it was the only thing in his life he had never once been late for. Every Sunday at 1900 Zulu, wherever he was on the planet, he called Ridge and they ran a pre-flight. That was Lawson's word for it. It had started when Ridge was 7 and afraid of the dark, and it had never stopped. Even now that Ridge was 16 and 6 feet tall and had grease permanently under his fingernails. Fuel. Ridge would say he'd eaten. Controls. Ridge would say what he'd fixed that week. Comms. Ridge would say who he'd talked to and who he was avoiding. Weather. That was the one that mattered. Weather was how they talked about his mother's family without ever saying their name. Lawson was a master sergeant in a pararescue squadron, the 47th, and at that particular moment, he was sitting on a stack of pallets in Djibouti with sweat running down the inside of his shirt, waiting for the satellite window to open. 19 years in, he had pulled a burned crew chief out of a rolled aircraft in the Hindu Kush by cutting the man's seat out around him with a hacksaw while the fuel cell dripped on both of them. And he had done it so calmly that the flight surgeon later said Lawson's voice on the tape sounded like a man reading to him. That was where the nickname came from. The younger guys called him Chapel. He hated it and answered to it. People assume men like Lawson are violent. He wasn't. He was patient in a way that unnerved people. He had been trained to look at a catastrophe and reduce it to a checklist, and he had learned, over 19 years and roughly 200 recoveries, that panic is just a lack of sequence. Everything terrible could be broken into steps. That belief was the load-bearing wall of the man. He had married Nella Bramlett when they were both 22 in Kell County, Mississippi, a place with 9,000 people and 1 water tower and 3 stoplights. And he had loved her honestly. What he had not understood at 22 was that in Kell County you did not marry a woman. You enlisted in a household. The Bramletts had been there since the timber days. Loretta Bramlett, Nella's mother, was 74 years old for feet 11 and ran the family the way a harbor master runs a harbor. She had 4 sons. Hurried, the eldest, was the polite one, which in that family meant the dangerous one. Marion had a neck like a fire hydrant and drove for the county. Buford ran the pallet mill and had been arrested 9 times before he was 30 and convicted 0. Rankin, the baby, was a sheriff's deputy at 26 and wore his sunglasses indoors. Lawson had been offered a place in all of it, twice, and both times he'd said no. And the second time Loretta had smiled at him across a table of catfish and said, "Sweet as pie," that a man who won't take the family's hand has decided to be a stranger, and strangers get treated like strangers. He had thought it was theater. He had been 24. 9 months later, he'd shipped to his first deployment, and by the time he came home, the marriage was over, and the boy was 3, and the custody paperwork had somehow been filed in a courthouse where a Bramlett cousin ran the clerk's office. He never fought them for Ridge. That was the thing he could not explain to anyone in the squadron. He had decided very early that if he tried to take that boy out of Kell County by force, he would lose, and Ridge would be the one who paid the bill for it. So he did the slow thing. He sent money that Nella never asked about. He came home on every leave he had for 13 years. He taught Ridge how to time an engine and how to pack a bag and how to sit still. He built the pre-flight, and he never missed it because he wanted his son to know that there was one fixed point in the world that the Bramletts did not control. That Sunday, Ridge did not answer. Lawson told himself it was the storms rolling up out of the Gulf. He sent a text. He waited a day and called again. Nothing. He called Nella and got voicemail, and Nella never let a phone ring. Not because she was attentive, but because she was the kind of anxious that needs to know. On the third day, he called Duard Follansby, who owned the garage where Ridge worked Saturdays and after school, an old man with a limp and 40 years of engine oil in the creases of his hands. Duard picked up on the second ring, and Lawson heard him breathing for a while before he said anything. And in that pause, Lawson felt the floor of his life tilt about 4 degrees. "Son," Duard said, "I've been trying to figure out how to call you." Lawson stood up off the pallets. Somewhere behind him a generator was running, and a couple of guys were laughing about something. He put his finger in his other ear. "Where is he?" Lawson said. "He's at Forest General, over in Hattiesburg. They flew him out Tuesday." Duard's voice broke apart in the middle of the sentence and came back. "Lawson, they took a wrecking bar to that boy." He did not remember the next 40 seconds. He remembered the ones after them, because that is where he started the checklist. They let him talk to Ridge on the 5th day. By then, Lawson had a legal pad on his knee, which was a habit from the job. Every recovery generates paperwork, and paperwork is how you keep a thing from becoming a feeling. The nurse held the phone to Ridge's ear because Ridge could not hold it. Both of his arms were broken. The left forearm had taken a swing across the radius and ulna and needed a plate and 11 screws. The right had gone at the humerus, a spiral fracture, which is what happens when an arm is being twisted and struck at the same time. His jaw was wired. He had a cheek fracture and a hairline crack in the left orbital floor, and there was a stitched laceration behind his ear where the flat of the bar had come down on the skull and the skin had split against the bone. "Hey, Dad," Ridge said. It did not sound like Ridge. Wired jaws make a voice come out flat and wet. All the consonants smeared, like a man talking through a mouthful of cloth. Lawson pressed his thumb into the meat of his own leg until it hurt. "I'm here," he said. "I'm right here. Run me a pre-flight." There was a long silence, and then a wet sound that Lawson understood, after a second, was his son trying to laugh. "Fuel," Ridge said. "They got a tube." "Copy." "Controls." A pause. "Can't move my arms, Dad." "Copy." "Comms." His breathing changed. "Dad, they took turns to beat me." Lawson wrote it down. That is not a metaphor. He wrote the sentence on the legal pad in block capitals, and then he wrote the time, and then he said, in the voice they called Chapel, "Tell me the sequence." And Ridge told him, because that was the thing they had built for 13 years, the ability to reduce a nightmare to steps. And it turned out that it worked, and Lawson would think about that for the rest of his life. His son lay in a hospital bed with 2 ruined arms and gave a structured report. Thursday night, 11:40, behind the pallet mill on Dogleg Road. 4 of them. Uncle Buford had the bar, a 30-inch wrecking bar with a hex shaft that Ridge recognized because he had used it himself to lever a transmission. Uncle Marion held him against the fender of a van. Uncle Sherrod stood 8 feet away with his arms folded and did not touch anybody, and did not stop anybody, and twice said the words, "That's enough for that one," like a man calling innings. Uncle Rankin was in uniform, off his shift, and he was the one filming it on his phone. "They passed it," Ridge said. "The bar." Buford did the left one, and then he gave it to Marion, and Marion did. He did the other one. And Rankin took a turn. He hit me in the face. Sherrod never touched me. How long? Maybe 4 minutes. Did anyone say why? The pause went on so long that Lawson, checked the call, was still connected. They said if I ever went in the yard again at night, they'd do the legs too. Lawson wrote yard. He underlined it twice. He asked 3 more questions, got 3 more answers, told his son he loved him and that he would see him soon, and that this was survivable, which was the truest sentence available. Then he ended the call, walked out past the generator into 41 degrees of Horn of Africa afternoon, and stood in the sun for 11 minutes without moving. His phone buzzed while he was standing there. A voicemail from a Mississippi number he didn't have saved. He played it. Buford's voice, unhurried, half amused, with the television going somewhere behind him. "Heard you're coming home, soldier boy. Don't you rush. Tell your father we'll be waiting at the airport." That was the whole message. 12 seconds. Lawson listened to it 4 times and noticed, on the 4th, the small detail that would end up being worth more than everything else on the recording. Buford had said, "Tell your father." He was not talking to Lawson. He had left that message on Ridge's phone, and Ridge's phone was in a plastic property bag at a nurse's station in Hattiesburg, and Nella had listened to it and forwarded it, which meant Nella had made a choice, and Lawson filed that away too. 40 minutes later, the second call came in, and this one was live. "Well, hey there," Loretta Bramlett said, and Lawson could hear that she was smiling, because you can always hear it. "Is this the war hero, Mrs. Bramlett? Now don't get formal with me. Sugar, you slept in my house. Ice moved in a glass. I'll tell you why I'm calling. Nella says you've been on the phone with lawyers, and I want to save you the money because I always liked you, even when you were rude to me. Your son's put my son in a hospital. My grandson," she said, correcting him gently, "got himself hurt doing something he was told twice not to do. That's a shame, and I've cried about it." A pause exactly long enough to be a performance. "Now you go on and call somebody. Go ahead, honey. Call the sheriff, call the district attorney, call the newspaper if there's one left. Call the governor if you've got his number, and I doubt you do. I might." And then she laughed. It was not a cackle. It was a warm, delighted, genuine laugh. The laugh of a woman who has just been told a joke she has heard before and still enjoys. "Baby," Loretta Bramlett said, "this family owns every badge in 3 counties. Then she said, "Good night," and she hung up. And that recording, because Lawson had started recording it 4 seconds in, out of 19 years of habit, would eventually be played out loud in a federal courtroom in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, to a jury of 12 people at a volume that made a man in the back row flinch. To understand why 4 grown men took turns on a 16-year-old with a wrecking bar, you have to understand what the Bramletts actually sold, because it was not timber and it had not been for 20 years. In 1998, Kell County did what a lot of broke rural counties did. It could not afford probation officers, so it privatized misdemeanor probation. A private company would supervise people convicted of small things: a bad tag, a suspended license, a bar fight, a hot check, and the company would be paid not by the county but by the offenders themselves. It cost the taxpayers nothing. That was the pitch, and on paper it was even true. The company that won the contract was Bramlett Community Corrections, and Sherrod Bramlett was 29 years old when he signed it. Here is how it worked, and I want you to follow it, because the machine is elegant and it is legal until almost the very end. A man gets a $200 fine for driving on a suspended license. He cannot pay $200 today, because if he had $200, he would have fixed the license. So the judge puts him on probation to pay it off and hands supervision to the private company. The company charges a monthly supervision fee, $45, then a one-time enrollment fee, then a drug screen fee, whether or not drugs were ever mentioned in the case, then a fee for the ankle monitor, and a fee for the battery charger for the ankle monitor, and a late fee when the man is short. The fines go to the county. The fees go to the company. And every single dollar the man scrapes together is applied to fees first. So the $200 fine never goes down. Month 11, he still owes $200, and now he also owes $900 in fees. When he misses a payment, the company files a violation, and a judge in Kell County, that was Judge Hume Castleberry, who had run unopposed since 2004, signs a bench warrant. Now he is arrested. Now he sits in the Kell County Regional Detention Center. And here is the part that stops being clever and starts being something else. The jail ran a work release program. Work release means an inmate can leave to hold a job and pay his way. Marion Bramlett drove the transport vans, and the jobs that were available in a county with almost no employers We're at Bramlett Pallet and Crating, where Buford was the yard boss. That is the whole machine. The family fined you, supervised you, charged you, violated you, arrested you, jailed you, transported you, and then employed you at $9 an hour, out of which the jail took a housing fee. The probation company took its supervision fee, and the transport service took a per-mile charge. A man could work a 50-hour week and come out owing more than he did on Monday. There were people in Kell County who had been on misdemeanor probation for 11 years for a single traffic ticket. When Lawson's lawyer finally counted, there were 1,140 people under private supervision in a county of 9,000. 1 in 8 human beings, including infants, in a permanent payment relationship with one family. And it was not confined to Kell. Sherrod had won the contract in Poteet County in 2011 and Monasco County in 2016. 3 counties, 3 sheriffs whose campaigns were funded by the same 4 brothers. 3 courthouses. When Loretta Bramlett said her family owned every badge in 3 counties, she was not bragging. She was describing an org chart. Ridge Teal did not know any of that. Ridge Teal was 16 and he liked engines. He had a job at Follansbee Automotive, and because Duard Follansbee was the only real mechanic left within 30 miles, the county's fleet came to him. The sheriff's cruisers, the road department trucks, and the white 15-passenger transport vans with the seats bolted to the floor and the cage behind the driver. Ridge did the oil, the brakes, the tires. He was good, and he was cheap, and nobody thought about him at all, which is a thing that happens to teenagers and is occasionally very expensive for the adults who allow it. 3 things bothered him over about 4 months. The first was mileage. Ridge kept the service book, and the vans were putting on far more miles than the trip sheets accounted for. A run from the jail to the pallet mill and back is 11 miles. The vans were logging 400 a week. The second was the fuel receipts stuffed in the door pockets, which he was supposed to throw away and did not, because he was the kind of kid who keeps things. They were from stations in Poteet and Monasco County. Crews were being moved across county lines, which meant men jailed in one county were being worked in another, and Ridge did not know the legal significance of that, but he knew it did not match the paperwork. The third was Pearl Hannigan. Pearl was 58, a roofer, and he had been on probation since 2019 for a citation for an unsecured load. He came into Duard's shop sometimes to drink coffee. In July, on a day when the heat index in South Mississippi hit 109, Pearl went down on the loading dock at Bramlett Pallet and Crating and did not get up, and the incident report said he had been found unresponsive in the parking lot at 6:20 p.m. after his shift. Ridge knew that was wrong, because he had been at the mill at 4:15 that afternoon dropping off a van, and he had seen Pearl sitting against a stack of skids with his shirt off and 2 men standing over him arguing about whether to call anybody. 2 hours. Somebody had spent 2 hours deciding whether Pearl Hannigan was worth an ambulance. Then they moved him to the parking lot, so it would look like he'd collapsed after work, off the clock, not a workplace death, not an inmate death in custody, which is a thing that has to be reported to the state. Ridge told Duard. Duard told him to leave it alone, in the voice of a man who has lived somewhere his whole life. So Ridge did what a 16-year-old does. On a Thursday night, he rode his bike out to the mill yard because he wanted to photograph the van board, the whiteboard in the dispatch shed with the crew assignments and destinations on it, which would prove the cross-county runs. He got the photograph. He got 11 of them. He also, without understanding what he had, photographed the clipboard that recorded that Pearl Hannigan had been checked out to a work crew on the day he died, which meant the man had died in custody, which meant a report had never been filed, which meant somebody in that family was going to prison. And Rankin Bramlett, who was sitting in his cruiser 200 feet away in the dark with his lights off because he had a girl on the phone, saw a bike. They did not know what was on the phone. That was the thing Lawson figured out later, and it changed everything about how he ran it. The phone had been in Ridge's back pocket, and the beating had been about a boy in a yard where he should not have been. And when it was over, Buford took the phone and threw it against the concrete and stomped on it and left the pieces in the gravel. They believed they had destroyed it. They had destroyed a screen. The 4 minutes happened. The uncles went home. Marion drove Ridge to within 100 yards of his mother's house and pushed him out of the van, and Ridge walked the last 100 yards with both arms hanging and rang the doorbell with his forehead. And Nella Bramlett, who had spent 19 years being a member of that family, opened the door, looked at her son, and then did something that surprised everybody, including herself. She went out to the gravel at the mill at 2 in the morning with a flashlight, on her hands and knees, and picked up 11 pieces of a telephone and put them in a freezer bag. Lawson learned that 8 days later. It reorganized several things in his head. The 47th Rescue Squadron was on the morning that Master Sergeant Teal requested to see the commander in the last 3 weeks of a deployment, which is the worst 3 weeks when everyone is tired and nothing is new. Lieutenant Colonel Duff Windover had been running the unit for 14 months. He was a big, soft-spoken man from Nebraska who had come up as a combat rescue officer and who had a reputation for being almost impossible to alarm. Lawson had not slept in 3 days. He came in with a legal pad, which Windover noticed, and he stood at a rough approximation of attention, which Windover also noticed, because Teal never stood at attention for anybody. "Sit down, Chapel," Windover said. "I'd rather stand, sir. I'm going to ask you for something, and I want you to say no to me," standing up. Windover put his pen down. Lawson gave the report. He gave it the way he would have given a mission debrief, because that was the only way he could get through it without his voice doing something. 16 years old. Both forearms, one humerus, mandible wired, orbital floor. 4 assailants. One of them a sworn deputy. Motive, suppression of evidence. He laid the legal pad on the desk with the timeline on it, in block capitals, times noted, and he said that he was requesting emergency leave and that he understood the airport in Gulfport was a problem. "Why is the airport a problem?" Windover said. Lawson put his phone on the desk and played Buford's voicemail. 12 seconds. Then he played Loretta's call. 91 seconds, ending in that warm, comfortable laugh and the sentence about the badges. Windover listened to both twice. Then he got up and walked to the window of a plywood office in Djibouti and looked at nothing for a while. Here's what a man like Windover is actually thinking in that moment, and it is not what a movie would tell you. He is thinking, my senior enlisted rescue specialist is about to fly, alone, into a jurisdiction controlled by the people who did this, where they have announced their intention to meet him at the airport, and where every law enforcement officer he can appeal to is on their payroll. He is thinking that if Lawson Teal gets off that plane by himself, one of two things happens. Either they arrest him on something they invented, and a 19-year non-commissioned officer with a maroon beret ends up in a Kell County holding cell, where things happen to people, or Lawson does not let them, and then a highly trained man does something in an airport that ends his life as surely as a bullet would. Both outcomes lose the man, and Duff Windover was in the business of not losing men. "How many people know about this?" he asked. "Nobody, sir." "That's about to be untrue." Windover came back to the desk and picked up the legal pad and read the whole thing again, slowly. "You're not going to hurt anybody." "No, sir." "Say it in a way I believe." Lawson thought about it honestly, which took a few seconds. "Sir, if I hurt one of them, this becomes a fight between two families, and my family is one boy with 2 broken arms. I don't want to fight. I want a recovery." Windover looked at him for a long moment. The squadron's block leave had been on the calendar for 11 weeks. 44 people, redeploying through Ramstein, all of them with orders in hand, all of them with a legal right to travel wherever they wanted on their own time and their own money. Nobody needed permission to buy a plane ticket. That was the crack in the whole thing, and Windover, who was a patient man and not at all a soft one, found it in about 90 seconds. He said 4 words: "Take the whole squadron." Then he sat down, and while Lawson was still processing it, he added the rest, which was longer and mattered more. "Nobody goes armed. Nobody touches a soul. Everybody wears civilian clothes except you. You're in service dress, and I want that beret on your head where a camera can see it. Every man and woman on that airplane records from wheels down. I'm sending Captain Ivers from legal on his own leave, and he's going to be standing 11 feet behind you the entire time, doing absolutely nothing. Wendover finally allowed himself something that was not quite a smile. "Master Sergeant, you said you wanted a recovery, so run it like one. What's the first thing you do on any recovery?" Lawson had taught that answer to 60 students. "Survey the scene, sir, before you touch the patient. Then go survey Mississippi," Wendover said. "And, Chapel, call the bureau from Ramstein. Not from here. I want a federal agent's phone to ring before your boots hit American concrete." Gulfport Biloxi International Airport has one terminal, 6 gates, and a baggage claim you can see from the security exit. It is a small, friendly, sunlit building with a fiberglass shrimp boat in the lobby, and it is a genuinely terrible place to commit a crime, which nobody in the Bramlett family appear to have considered. They arrived at 10:20 in the morning on a Tuesday. Rankin Bramlett brought a marked Kell County cruiser and parked it in the fire lane with the light bar running, which is a thing men do when they want to be seen. Marion came in a crew cab truck. Buford came because he wanted to, and Sherrod, who was not stupid, came with a piece of paper. The paper was the actual plan. The rest was decoration. 11 days earlier, a complaint had been sworn out in Kell County alleging that Lawson Teal had, on a date in the previous spring, threatened a member of the Bramlett family by telephone. It was thin, and it was almost entirely fictional, and it did not matter because Judge Hume Castleberry had signed the warrant on it in 4 minutes. The plan was not to beat Lawson Teal at an airport. The plan was to arrest him at an airport, in front of his son's mother, and put him in Kell County Regional Detention on a Tuesday before a holiday weekend, where he would sit until the following Monday. 5 days. A service member on emergency leave who does not report where he is supposed to report acquires a very serious problem very quickly, and a man with an active clearance who is arrested for a violent threat acquires another one. They were not trying to hurt him for an afternoon. They were trying to end him in a week, using nothing but paper, which was the only weapon that family had ever really needed. Delta Flight 2216 out of Atlanta landed at 10:51. Sherrod stood at the bottom of the escalator with a warrant folded in his shirt pocket. Rankin stood 10 feet to his right with his thumbs in his belt. Marion and Buford flanked the walkway. Nella Bramlett was there too, standing well apart from all of them near the rental car counters, because Buford had told her to come and because she had decided something at 2 in the morning in a gravel lot and had not told anybody yet. The first passengers came down, a woman with a stroller, 2 men in golf shirts, an older couple, then a man in a gray t-shirt came down carrying a duffel, and behind him a woman with a shaved head and a rucksack, and behind her 3 more, and then 4 more, and the escalator kept delivering people, and none of them turned toward baggage claim. They fanned out along the wall in a loose arc, unhurried, setting bags down, and every single one of them took out a phone and held it up. 41 people. 23 of them had their phones recording. 6 had small body cameras clipped to their shirts, the kind the squadron used for training reviews, which cost $90 and are entirely legal to wear in a public airport in the state of Mississippi. Sherrod Bramlett's face did something. Lawson Teal came down the escalator last, alone, in service dress blues with the maroon beret squared on his head, and stopped 6 feet from Sherrod, and set his bag down on the floor, and put his hands loosely behind his back, and said nothing at all. It was the silence that broke it. There is a script for a confrontation, and the script requires the other man to talk. Sherrod had 4 sentences ready, and every one of them needed Lawson to say something first. Rankin, 26 years old, in a Kell County uniform 90 miles outside Kell County, stepped forward and put his hand on the butt of his sidearm and said the words that a very large number of people would later hear. "You got a lot of nerve bringing an audience, boy. Ain't none of these people gonna help you. We own every badge from here to the state line." Behind Lawson, 41 phones were recording in a public place on a federal-funded airport concourse from a man wearing a badge and a firearm, announcing that law enforcement authority in 3 counties was a family possession. Captain Ivers of the Air Force Judge Advocate General's Corps, on personal leave, in a polo shirt, standing 11 feet back with his hands in his pockets, closed his eyes very briefly the way a fisherman does when the line goes tight. "Sir," Lawson said, "are you placing me under arrest?" "I sure am." "On what charge?" Sherrod handed over the warrant. Lawson read it, all of it, taking his time, then folded it and put it in his pocket and said, "That's a Kell County warrant. This is Harrison County." "Don't matter." "It does, actually." Lawson turned his head slightly. "Mom." A Harrison County Sheriff's deputy assigned to airport patrol had been standing near the shrimp boat for 4 minutes with a radio in her hand. She had already run the plate on the cruiser in the fire lane, and she had already been told by her sergeant that no Kell County unit had notified anybody of an out-of-jurisdiction arrest, which was, at minimum, a discourtesy and possibly something else. And behind her, walking in from the parking side with an ID already out, came a woman in a navy jacket named Waverly Bosch, who was a supervisory special agent with the FBI out of the Jackson Field office, and who had received a phone call 31 hours earlier from Ramstein Air Base, Germany, from a master sergeant she had never met, who had said in a very calm voice that he wanted to report a color of law violation and a suspected forced labor operation, and that if she happened to be at the Gulfport Airport on Tuesday morning, she would probably find the entire subject matter of her investigation standing in one place. What happened over the following 6 minutes was not violent, and it was not loud. Rankin Bramlett was disarmed by his own hand, giving up the weapon, at the instruction of a Harrison County deputy, in front of his brothers. The Kell County warrant was withdrawn that afternoon by a very frightened assistant district attorney. Nobody went to jail that morning. But there's a photograph from an airport that ran on the wire service 11 days later and eventually appeared on a Senate committee screen. It is taken from a mezzanine, looking down. On the left, for men in a knot, one of them in uniform, all of them with their hands out and their mouths open. On the right, a wall of 41 people in T-shirts and jeans with their phones up, absolutely silent. And in the middle, one man in blue with a maroon beret, standing at parade rest, looking at the floor. Lawson was later asked, under oath, why he had said so little. "Because I wasn't there to argue with them," he said. "I was there to get them on the record." Ridge Teal had surgery number 2 on a Thursday. Dr. Onika Balagan, orthopedic trauma, put a 9-hole plate on the left ulna and a rod down the right humerus and came out into the hall to talk to a father, and found instead a hallway with 19 people in it, most of them sitting on the floor because there were not enough chairs, one of them asleep with his head on a fire extinguisher cabinet. She had been a trauma surgeon for 11 years and had never once seen a family like that. "Which of you is the father?" she said. "That one," said about 9 people, pointing. She told Lawson that the arms would be functional. She told him it would take about a year to be true. And then she said the thing that changed the case, because doctors are witnesses and everybody forgets that. "Master Sergeant, I want to show you the right humerus." She pulled the imaging up and turned the screen. "This is a spiral fracture. To make this, you have to rotate the limb while you strike it. That takes 2 hands, and it takes time. And this," she moved the cursor, "is the left ulna, a transverse fracture, a direct blow. Different mechanism, different angle of force." She looked at him. These injuries were not produced in one motion by one person in a hurry. They were produced by more than one person, deliberately, in sequence, with pauses. I've written that in the chart. I'll say it in a courtroom. Lawson thanked her, walked 10 feet down the hall, put his hand flat on the wall, and stood there. Bristol Nance found him at the coffee machine on the 2nd floor at 11 at night. She was 22, and she had worked the front desk at Bramlett Community Corrections for 3 years, and she was carrying a canvas tote bag with both arms wrapped around it like a woman carrying a cat that does not want to be carried. "Are you Ridge's dad?" "I am. I did his mama's paperwork," she said. "I mean, I've done a lot of people's paperwork." She was shaking. "I need you to know I didn't understand it at first. When you're 22 and somebody give you a job and a computer, you just do what the screen tells you." She had been the one who entered payments, and she had noticed in year 2 that the software applied every payment to fees first and fines last, automatically, with no way to change it, and that when she had asked Sherrod about it, he had said that was just how the vendor built it. She had also noticed that when a client's balance got to a certain size, a violation report generated itself. She had asked about that too. In the tote bag were 460 pages. Monthly reconciliation sheets she had printed for 3 years because the office printer was jammed half the time and she kept hard copies out of anxiety. Client ledgers, and a printout of the fee schedule from 2016 with Sherrod's handwriting on it, raising the ankle monitor fee from $6 a day to $11, with a note in the margin that read, "They'll pay it. Where else are they going?" "There's a lady named Etta Pruitt," Bristol said. "She's 68. She got a ticket in 2013 for a taillight. $48. She had to stop for a second. She's paid $4,160, and she still owes the $48. Lawson looked at the bag for a while. "Bristol," he said, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to think before you answer. Are you willing to say all of this to the government?" "Will they arrest me?" "I don't know," he said, because he was not going to lie to a 22-year-old at 11 at night in a hospital. "I know a woman who will tell you the truth about that. I can call her right now, or in the morning, whichever you want." Bristol Nance looked at the tote bag, and then at the door of the room where a 16-year-old was lying with 2 rebuilt arms, and she said, "Now." By 2 in the morning, Waverly Bosch had 460 pages photographed and a 19-page interview, and had said out loud in an empty hospital cafeteria, "Master Sergeant, I've been trying to build a case like this in this state for 6 years. Do you understand what you just handed me?" "Yes, ma'am." "Do you?" She looked at him hard. "Because a lot of men in your position want a bad night for 4 people. This is not that. This is 18 months. Lawson Teal said the sentence that Bosch would repeat at his son's high school graduation 2 years later, when she came as a guest. "Ma'am, I've spent 19 years crawling to people slower than anybody wanted me to. I'm not in a hurry. I'm just not stopping." There is a document in Lawson Teal's world called an isolated personnel report. When somebody goes down behind enemy lines, you do not start driving. You build the report first. Where is he last confirmed? What does he have on him? Who is looking for him? What is the terrain? What is the weather at 0400? Who else is in the area, and what will they do when they hear a helicopter? Every recovery Lawson had ever run began with hours of a man sitting still with a pen. So he did that. For 4 months, in a rented, single-wide outside Hattiesburg with his son in the back bedroom relearning how to hold a fork, Lawson Teal built an isolated personnel report on an entire county. He was not doing it alone, and that is the part people leave out when they tell this story. 6 members of the 47th used their leave, and then their terminal leave, and then in 2 cases their actual resignations, to stay in Mississippi. Tech Sergeant Ignacio Biquet, a paramedic who could read a medical record better than most lawyers, went through 11 years of Kell County Jail incident reports and built a spreadsheet of every inmate medical event and cross-referenced it against ambulance dispatch logs he obtained by public records request, and found 9 occasions where an ambulance was called to Bramlett Pallet and Crating, and 1 occasion where an inmate died, and no ambulance was ever called at all. Staff Sergeant Hobie Traynor, whose actual job was helicopter hoist operations and who therefore thought in terms of maps and patterns, took the fuel receipts Ridge had squirreled away and the van's own maintenance odometer readings and reconstructed the routes. Captain Dessa Rondo, a combat rescue officer with a public policy degree she had never used, sat in the back of county supervisor meetings in 3 counties for 4 months taking notes in a composition book, and got herself photographed being asked to leave one of them, which turned out to be extremely useful. What they built by February was a wall. The wall was in the single-wide's front room, and it was 11 feet long. On the left were the people, a photograph or a name card for every human being under private supervision whose file they could obtain, and there were hundreds. In the middle were the 4 brothers and their mother and the 3 sheriffs and Judge Castleberry, with the relationships drawn in string, because Biquet was a paramedic and paramedics love string. On the right was the money, which was the ugliest part. $11.4 million in supervision fees collected across 3 counties in 6 years, against fines of $1.9 million. $6 extracted for every dollar the courts had actually imposed. And under all of it, on a shelf in a plastic evidence box, was a hard drive. Because Nella Bramlett had picked 11 pieces of a telephone out of a gravel lot at 2 in the morning. And one of those pieces was the logic board in a data recovery lab in Baton Rouge, charged $1,100 in 40 days and pulled back 100% of the photographs. The van board, the crew assignments, the cross-county destinations, and the clipboard page showing that Pearl Hannigan, 58, had been checked out to a Bramlett work crew on the afternoon he died, time-stamped, in a photograph taken by a 16-year-old at 11:31 p.m. on a Thursday, 9 minutes before 4 men broke his arms to stop him from having it. Deputy Sally Kinchin came in March. She had 11 years on the Kell County Sheriff's Office, and she had been passed over for sergeant 3 times, and she had a nephew on private probation. Waverly Bosch approached her carefully in a Dollar General parking lot, and Kinchin listened for 2 minutes and then said, "I've been waiting on somebody to ask me since 2019, and then she cried for a while in a federal agent's car, and then she wore a recording device for 9 weeks. What Kinchin delivered was the thing that turns a fraud case into a civil rights case. She recorded Sheriff Cole Van Doak instructing deputies at a shift briefing that anyone with an outstanding Bramlett Community Corrections violation was to be arrested on site regardless of what the deputy was actually responding to. Domestic call, medical call, traffic stop did not matter. She recorded Rankin Bramlett saying, in a patrol car, laughing, that the mill needed 12 bodies for a Friday order and he'd go make some warrants. She recorded, on a Tuesday in April, Sheriff Doak telling a room of 11 men that the FBI had been sniffing around and that anybody who talked to them would find out what happened to the Teal boy. That last one was the sentence that made a federal grand jury real. By late April, Waverly Bosch had a sealed indictment with 16 defendants on it, and a problem, which is the problem every federal agent has and never talks about: the takedown. 16 arrests across 3 counties where most of the local law enforcement is on the indictment. You cannot ask the sheriff for help arresting the sheriff. You get one morning at dawn with whatever bodies you can pull from 3 field offices and the marshals, and if it goes badly, if somebody's cousin makes a phone call at 4 a.m., your targets scatter into 140,000 acres of pine and river bottom that they have hunted their entire lives, and you do not have. The 4 brothers were the hardest part of it. They were rarely in one place, they were always armed, and they had, between them, 11 properties, except 1 weekend a year. Lawson Teal had been married into that family for 4 years, and he had sat through it, and he remembered. The first weekend of May, every year, the Bramlett men went to the camp on the Chickasaw River. All of them. No wives, no phones with service, a generator, a card table, and 180 acres of bottomland with exactly one way in, a gravel spur off County Road 12 that crosses a slough on a low-water bridge. He brought it to Bosch on a Wednesday, and she looked at the map for a long time. "That road floods," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "How often?" "Any time it rains 4 inches upstream." Lawson put a second sheet on the table. "It rained 6 on Tuesday in Clark County. It's coming down that river now. By Saturday night, that bridge is under about 30 inches of water, and there is no way out of that camp by vehicle until Monday." Bosch stared at him. "Master Sergeant, are you telling me you would have served federal arrest warrants on 4 armed men at night on an island?" "No, ma'am." He set down a third sheet, which was a hoist plan drawn in pencil with weights and distances on it. "I'm telling you, it's not an island to me. It's a landing zone. Here is what people expect at this point in a story like this. They expect a father with a rifle. They expect somebody to get what he deserves in the dark where nobody can see it. That is not what happened, and the reason it is not what happened is the entire point of Lawson Teal. At 11:40 on the night of Saturday, the 3rd of May, 4 minutes past the anniversary, to the hour of the night behind the pallet mill, which was not an accident, because Lawson had chosen the hour and would admit it under oath without a flicker, the power went out at the Bramlett camp. A federal agent had opened the meter box on the pole 400 yards up the spur and pulled the disconnect. The generator kicked on 11 seconds later, Then it also stopped because there was a marshal standing next to it. For spotlights came on at once from 4 directions, and a voice came out of the dark that was not shouting. Kell County Camp. This is the Federal Bureau of Investigation. There are warrants for 4 men in that building. Nobody in there is going to be hurt tonight. Come out with empty hands, and this takes 90 seconds. It took 19 minutes because Buford Bramlett wanted to argue. Nobody fired a shot. That is a matter of record. What happened instead is that 4 men in their 40s and 50s who had spent their entire adult lives being the reason other people came out with their hands up, came out into the mud at midnight and found the road under 30 inches of black water and no vehicle on the property that could cross it. And then the helicopter came, because the second half of Lawson's proposal, the half that a supervisory special agent had approved in writing, with the concurrence of the U.S. Marshal Service and a Mississippi Air National Guard Rescue Wing that was authorized to conduct joint training with federal law enforcement, and which was from first minute to last entirely and infuriatingly legal, was this: the prisoners could not be driven out. They had to be extracted. An extraction from a flooded, unimproved site at night is a rescue operation. Rescue operations are conducted by rescue personnel under a rescue protocol, and the protocol does not care in the slightest what kind of man you are. Master Sergeant Lawson Teal was on the ground, in a flight suit, on his own time, as a qualified civilian volunteer under a signed memorandum, and he ran the packaging. If you have never seen a person package for a hoist, I need you to understand what it is, because Sherrod Bramlett described it to a psychiatrist 11 months later and used the word erased. You are laid on your back on a Stokes litter, which is a steel basket. Your ankles are strapped. Your thighs are strapped. Your hips, your chest, your shoulders. A cervical collar goes around your neck, so you cannot turn your head. Your arms are folded across your chest and secured inside the webbing, because a loose limb outside the basket in a rotor wash will be broken. A hypothermia wrap goes over you, a silver foil blanket taped. Your face is left clear, then a helmet, and then eye protection, and then a strap across your forehead. And then you cannot move anything. Not one thing. You can blink. Buford Bramlett, who had swung a 30-inch wrecking bar across a 16-year-old's forearm and passed it and taken it back, had both of his arms folded and strapped down inside a litter by a man who did it gently and correctly, and with the practiced narration that every rescue technician is trained to give a patient. I'm going to secure your right arm now. You'll feel pressure. Tell me if anything's numb. He said it in a voice like a man reading a hymn. Buford said something. Several people heard it. It is not in the transcript because the transcript only covers the arrest warnings, but 4 federal agents and 2 guard aircrew heard Buford Bramlett scream that he could not move his arms, and heard the man kneeling over him answer, without any change in tone at all. I know. It's temporary. And then they hoisted him 300 feet into the dark on a steel cable. They did all 4, one at a time, 22 minutes apart, because that is what the hoist cycle takes, which means each of the remaining brothers lay strapped in a litter in the mud in the rain, listening to a helicopter take his brother away and come back for him. Marion vomited inside the wrap and had to be turned on his side, which is a 2-man procedure done with a strap called a log roll, and it was done for him promptly and professionally by 2 people who had trained for 11 years to do it for someone they loved. Every one of them was medically assessed on landing. Vitals, pupils, capillary refill. Every one of them was given water. Nobody was struck. Nobody was insulted. There's 4 hours of video, and in all 4 hours, not one member of the recovery element raises his voice. And on the chest of each of the 4 men, before the hoist, Lawson Teal attached a standard mass casualty triage tag. Tear off, waterproof, numbered, with a color band at the bottom. It is not a taunt. It is protocol. Every package patient gets one. The FBI's own after-action report notes that the tagging was procedurally correct. He tagged all 4 of them green. Green means minimal. Green means walking wounded. Green means this one is not seriously hurt. This one can wait. This one is not a priority. Deal with him last. Sherrod Bramlett, who could not turn his head, spent the entire 19-minute flight to the staging area on the levee at Leakesville looking at the ceiling of a helicopter with a green tag on his chest, being kept perfectly safe by the father of the boy he had watched get beaten while he stood 8 feet away with his arms folded, saying that's enough for that one. They landed at 4:11 in the morning. By then, in 3 counties, 41 federal agents and marshals had executed 12 other warrants. Sheriff Colvin Doak was arrested in his kitchen. Judge Hume Castleberry was arrested in his driveway in a bathrobe. Loretta Bramlett, 74 years old, was arrested at her house on Ferry Street at 5:20 a.m., and she asked the agent at her door whether he knew who she was, and the agent, who was from Cincinnati, said, "Yes, ma'am. That's why I'm here." The trial took 5 weeks in Hattiesburg. The government charged conspiracy against rights and deprivation of rights under color of law, which are the 2 federal statutes that exist precisely for a county where the badges have been purchased: forced labor and conspiracy to commit forced labor, which carry 20 years apiece, and which the Bramlett's first 3 attorneys all insisted could not possibly apply to a work release program until the 4th one read the case law and asked for a continuance. Wire fraud for $11.4 million in fees moved across state lines through a payment processor in Alabama, obstruction, and laid across the whole thing like a net, racketeering. The evidence was not dramatic. That was the point. Federal cases are won by boredom. Bristol Nance testified for 2 days about a software setting. Deputy Sally Kinchin's recordings were played, 11 of them. Dr. Onika Baligan explained the difference between a transverse and a spiral fracture with a plastic bone in her hand, and told the jury that the injuries were sequential and deliberate. Etta Pruitt, 68, testified that she had paid $4,160 against a $48 taillight ticket, and when the prosecutor asked her why she had kept paying, she said, "Because they told me my other option was jail, and I've got a grandbaby," and a juror in the second row put her hand over her mouth. And Pearl Hannigan's daughter, who was 31 and drove a school bus in Waynesboro, sat in the gallery every single day of 5 weeks. Loretta Bramlett's phone call was played on the 8th day. All 91 seconds. The jury heard a warm, comfortable, delighted laugh, and then heard a 74-year-old woman say, "This family owns every badge in 3 counties," and the prosecutor did not comment on it at all. She simply pressed stop and said, "The government offers Exhibit 41," and sat down. Rankin Bramlett flipped in the 11th month, which surprised nobody, and testified against his brothers, which surprised everybody. He served 6 years. Marion got 14. Buford got 22. Sherrod Bramlett, who never touched anybody, who stood 8 feet away with his arms folded, who built the machine and signed a fee schedule and wrote "Where else are they going" in the margin, got 29 years, which was more than the 2 men who actually swung the bar, because the jury understood exactly what they were looking at, and so did the judge. Loretta Bramlett was convicted on the racketeering count and 1 count of obstruction and sentenced to 11 years. She was 75 at sentencing. She did not laugh. Sheriff Colvin Doak got 9. Judge Hume Castleberry surrendered his license, cooperated, and got 4. Bramlett Community Corrections was dissolved by court order, and the $11.4 million was placed into a restitution fund. 14 months later, a federal magistrate signed an order vacating every outstanding private probation balance in 3 Mississippi counties. 1,140 people got a letter in the mail saying they owed nothing to anyone. Etta Pruitt got $4,112 back and framed the check before she cashed it. And the thing that the family could never quite get their heads around, the thing Buford Bramlett's lawyer raised at sentencing and the judge dismissed in 1 sentence, was that not one person had laid a hand on any of them. Not at the airport. Not on the river. Not once. 22 years. And the man who put him there had spent the worst night of his life keeping him warm. Ridge Teal got the plates out his left arm 18 months later. He has a scar behind his ear that he does not hide and a right arm that aches when the pressure drops, which he says is useful because now he knows when it's going to rain. He works at Follansbee Automotive. Duart is 81 and mostly sits in a chair by the door and tells customers that the boy is better than he ever was, which is true. Ridge is 20 now. He has applied twice to a par rescue indoctrination course, and his father has told him twice, honestly, that he does not have to do this, and has been told twice, politely, to run a pre-flight and mind his business. Nella Bramlett testified for the government. She took her son's name back. She is Nella Teal on the mailbox now, though not on anything else. And she and Lawson are not married and are not going to be, and she comes to dinner on Sundays, and it is awkward, and it is fine. What she did at 2 o'clock in the morning on her hands and knees in a gravel lot is on page 9 of the indictment. Lawson Teal retired at 20 years. He teaches at a mountain rescue school in North Carolina now. There are 4 triage tags in a frame on the wall of his classroom, all of them green, and every class asks about them, and he tells the story exactly once per class, and he always ends it the same way, which is with the only sentence he wants any of those students to keep. "We don't do this to people," he says. "We do it for them. And the day you can't tell the difference anymore, hand in your kit." So, Nathan again. I want to point at the thing I think actually matters here, because it isn't the helicopter, it's the 4 months in the single wide. Every one of us has a fantasy version of this story where a father lands in Mississippi, finds 4 men in a bar, and settles it in an evening. And I understand the appeal. But run that tape all the way to the end, honestly. He's arrested by their sheriff, charged in their courthouse, sentenced by their judge. His son gets a father in prison instead of 2 working arms in a case that emptied 1,140 people's debts. The bar fight is the version where the Bramletts win. And they win easily because a fist fight was the only game they were actually good at. What beat them was a man who was constitutionally incapable of hurrying. He did not do anything superhuman. He wrote things down. He recorded a phone call because he'd been recording things for 19 years. He kept receipts a teenager had stuffed in a door pocket. He asked a scared 22-year-old front desk clerk one honest question, and then he shut up and let her decide. And when he finally moved, he moved with 41 witnesses, a lawyer standing 11 feet behind him, and a camera on every angle, because he understood something most angry people never learn, which is that the loud response gives your enemy an exit and the documented one doesn't. Here's the practical part, and I mean this one. Private misdemeanor probation is real. Pay-only probation is real. If you or somebody you love is ever told that you owe a company money for the privilege of being supervised over a fine you already can't afford, that arrangement has been challenged successfully in more than one state. There are legal aid organizations that do nothing else, and the single most useful thing you can do is get an itemized statement in writing showing how every dollar you've paid was applied. That one piece of paper is what took this family down. A 22-year-old kept the printouts because the printer jammed. And the last thing, Lawson Teal tagged 4 men green, and green means not a priority, deal with him last, and I've thought about that for a long time, and I don't think it was cruelty. I think it was the most accurate assessment he ever made. They had spent 30 years being the most important men in 3 counties. He looked at all 4 of them and correctly rated them as minor. If this one got you, you know what to do. Tell me in the comments what you'd have done at that airport gate. I read them. And I'll see you in the next one.